Welcome to the Transforming Leadership Podcast with author and speaker Dr. Steve Steff. I'm Jim Brangenberg, your host for the day. For more information about Dr. Steff and how the Transforming Leadership team builds effectiveness in leaders, please look online at tleadership.com. That's tleadership.com. Now let's join Dr. Steff in the studio. Hi, I'm Jim Brangenberg with the Transforming Leadership Podcast, and I'm joined by Dr. Steve Steff. Steve, before we begin, I thought it would be great to remind our listeners that we're right now in the middle. We're currently working through a whole bunch of Transforming Leadership proverbs or truisms. These are sayings that you and the team have put together to help our leaders that we invest our lives into. Today's Transforming Leadership proverb is, every organization has a culture. It just may not be what you say it is or what you think it is. So, Steve, my opening question is, why is it that there are some leaders that just are not aware of the culture that they are cultivating?
Yeah, that's a great question. But really, before we get into that, let me define culture for you, at least from our perspective.
Okay.
Definitely, and of course, there have been books written on culture, so we don't have time to go through the last 200 or 300 pages of defining culture. So for our organization, culture quite simply is what we reward, how we behave, and how we treat each other. That pretty much sums up our culture. We could have ping pong tables and foosball tables and all this other stuff. That doesn't really define our culture. What defines our culture is how we behave, how we treat each other, and what we reward. That's our culture. So then going back to why is it that sometimes senior leaders don't really know what the culture is, it's because of their level of removal. I have client organizations, or Transforming Leadership has client organizations, that we may have 5 tiers of leadership. And I've got one client, for instance, that's in, let me think now, 110 different locations. The culture in those locations, Jim, is set by the location manager, the leader at that location. That culture is not set in Denver where the home office is. They may think they're setting it, but it's driven on a local level. So if your corporate office is in Denver and you have a location in Austin, Texas, if you are not proactively ensuring that the location manager in Austin is reflecting, believes in, and driving the same culture that you are in Denver, well, then Denver quite probably has an entirely different culture. Additionally, we'll go one step further. Even if you're in a single location, or maybe just a couple of locations, let's say you're in a manufacturing facility, the culture that the people on the floor in that manufacturing facility are experiencing may be vastly different than the culture up in the executive offices. But by the time the executive offices get through the vice presidents, which get through the directors, which get through the supervisors, which gets through the leads, and it gets down to the floor, the way the people on the floor are treated, the way the supervisors behave, and the things on the floor or director level below that are rewarded may be entirely different from the expectations at the front office. That's a lot of words, but does that answer your question?
Well, it begins to answer the question. I think this is something you kind of, this is like an ogre. It's got onions. It's got layers. Yeah. Excuse me. We got to peel back the layers. Okay. A little Shrek reference there. This is, it used to be, back even when I started, and I got a few less years than you in industry, people were hired for skill sets.
Yeah.
But in today's world, if you really care about culture, you can't hire for skill set. You have to hire for culture. How does one make sure, in holding up to the truism, every organization is a culture? It may not just be what you say it is or what you think it is, but how about you have a culture that you want it to be, and we need to hire for it? How are you seeing companies today hire for culture?
Good. More and more companies, and certainly in our client base, more and more companies factor in culture and culture questions in their interview process. If you are an engineering-based organization, I've got a client down in South Carolina that I just love them, and they're a manufacturing organization, but they have a lot of engineers. And let's say you need a new engineer. This company has a very well-defined culture. You're familiar with the organization. this company has a very well defined, very well stated culture. And let's imagine that they need a new engineer and they start collecting resumes for engineer. Their hiring manager has all sorts of resumes and she's stacking up with education and experience and performance and they're, the top three, the three men or women bubble to the top that have outperformed everyone else in their field. Well, that's fine, but if one of those three has their own, everybody's got their own culture, everyone has their own set of core values, whether we know what they are or not. Let's say that this individual has core values that are in conflict with the culture of that organization. If they hire that individual, they have effectively diluted the culture of the organization, because the culture is defined by all the activity within the organization, not just the select activities. It's defined by how everyone is treated and how everyone performs and how everyone acts with each other and what everyone rewards. So you hire one person that is outside of your culture definition, you just diluted it.
Okay. But as in every organization, what starts at the top rolls throughout the organization. I mean, whatever is good or bad rolls downhill. Let's just say it, for lack of a better explanation, it rolls throughout the organizational chart, whatever you want to call it.
That's right, yeah.
And the whole do as I say, not as I do, that doesn't work in corporate culture. It never worked at home. Didn't work in the home culture. Doesn't work in corporate culture. So I want you to love your people, but you're an idiot. I don't want you in my office anymore. Get out of here. I mean, that doesn't work. Okay. So it starts
with, it doesn't work, but it happens all the time.
Right. But we're talking, but the people that are listening to this podcast, Transforming Leadership followers, they're a higher quality of people that really understand we want to dig deep into culture. We want our cultures to help our people know that they're loved and appreciated, and we want to make sure that the culture is what we plan it to be. We want a healthy culture. I mean, I'm assuming everybody wants a healthy culture. So how do our actions impact the development of a culture? Talk about some specific things that can help develop a healthy culture.
Well, our actions, again, our actions are our culture. So if you are, let's say that you've got a culture that your core value statement stresses kindness and fairness and a few things like that, but of course your mission statement and your core value statement probably also maintain that you've got performance in there someplace. We've got to, we don't have to bow to, but we've got to pay attention to that bottom line. We've got to make a profit or we go away. That culture ceases to exist. So if we become subservient to the bottom line only, and we focus every day only on performance and expectations being met, with no nod to the culture and how people are treated, or at least how we have defined, how we have stated our expectations of how people are treated, eventually, as I said, it devolves, not evolves, it devolves to we are strictly a performance culture. Again, I'll refer back to my client in South Carolina. Their culture is defined by two pillars, caring and performance. And they will be the first to tell you that over the years, there got to be initially for several years, there was a strong imbalance. The performance pillar was much larger than the caring pillar. And then when they got alerted to how that really was coming across in the workplace, the caring pillar far outgrew the performance pillar. People were allowed to do and act any way they wanted to, and then we just cared for them and saw them through their challenges. So what I'm advocating is you define that culture, whatever it might be, and then you try to maintain a balance between the caring and the performance, or the culture and the performance. Performance may be a key component of your culture, but again, state what it is and live up to it. Let me give you one last example of this. I was called to an IT company in Raleigh, North Carolina several years ago. I went and met with the senior leadership team, talked with them about why they called me in and what they were hoping to accomplish. And it was a really interesting meeting. It was one of these discovery meetings where they find out about me and I find out about them. And one of the first things the CEO said is, this is a hard place to work. This is a really, really difficult place to work. So we don't ever hire someone and tell them, look, you're going to love working here. We hire people and tell them, look, you're probably not going to like working here, because for the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to be hard on you. We are going to drive you like a rented mule. We're just going to be tough. We're going to do this and this and this and this. He was just as clear as he could possibly be. But then he followed that up as saying, because in 3 years, we're going to go public and you're going to be a stockholder and you're going to make more money than you've ever made in your life. But from now until that 3-year anticipated period, things are going to be tough. Jim, first, I didn't want to work for them because there would be a big conflict in core values with that organization. But I did have to respect the fact that the CEO says, this is who we are. If you don't like it, if you can't do it, then you best not come to work here, because this is how we treat our people and this is what we reward. So at least he was honest in the process.
Steve, a culture left on its own to just do its own thing without any intentionality from senior leadership, you use the word devolves. Is that always what happens?
Yes. It's a law of physics, quite frankly, that anything left to its own, the law of entropy, I'll paraphrase it, but anything left to its own will devolve, will deteriorate. And that's exactly what happened in the culture.
Wow.
Because the one thing that will always maintain in that culture is performance and profitability. That won't ever go away.
Right.
So in light of the fact that won't go away, that will become more and more and more important to where it takes precedence, not only to where it takes precedence, but to where it becomes the only thing that matters.
Okay. So that was one of the main points that we need to be intentional. It's got to be intentional. But one of the other struggles that senior leaders struggle with is being removed from that daily environment, being removed from what's actually happening throughout their organization, whether it's a small organization or a monstrous organization. How do we help our leaders listening today to the Transforming Leadership podcast to understand they can't be removed if they want to maintain the culture that they want to maintain?
Yeah. Well, first, Jim, identify and define the culture that you want and that you expect. Let's put it in words. Let's put it in black and white so everyone knows what the expectation is as far as culture. Whether it's in your core value statement or whatever it might be. Second, hold every tier of leadership accountable for driving that culture and living up to that culture. It must be a part of your performance reviews. It must be a part of your pay, your bonus system. It's factored into everything you do.
What do you mean? So you're actually going to put on their review, which whether they're doing those daily, monthly, weekly, yearly, that you're actually evaluating them on culture, not just performance.
Absolutely, because culture drives your performance. It is the expectation.
Have you seen this put into action? Have you actually seen this work?
Yeah, almost every client that Transforming Leadership has, they factor in the culture of the core values into their performance reviews. Because the absence of that being factored into the performance review, Jim, I'm going to lead in the way that is most natural or most comfortable to me personally, not to what your expectation is. Does that make sense? That one of the truisms we'll get to down the road in weeks to come is that we generally lead in the way that is most comfortable if we were being led. So I'm going to do what's natural to me. Maybe not what's most effective, maybe not what's most productive, but what's most natural to me. And if I have core values of my own that are in conflict with yours, and you're the CEO or you're the board or you're the senior leader, I don't really care about that as long as I'm getting the job done. If I'm not held accountable to it.
But that's a whole new shift of paradigm for a lot of organizations, maybe some people that are just getting introduced to Transforming Leadership, that I need to base my evaluations not just on performance, but on culture that's being created and cultivated underneath the leadership of the person that's sitting in front of me. That's fantastic.
Cultivate is the same root word, right? And you say that you need to. I'll back up on that for a moment. You only need to if it's important to you, but don't imply or put on your masthead that it is important to you if you allow performance and behaviors otherwise.
And it should be important to you if you care about your profitability. If you care about the bottom line, culture should be extremely important.
And if you care about your people.
That's right. And if you care about your people. That's great. Dr. Steve Steff, thank you so much. Great conversation on understanding culture and making sure that it's positive. And to you guys, our listeners, just check us out online, tleadership.com, tleadership.com. There's lots of ways to contact us. There's a phone number. There's a contact form. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to tell us what we can do to help you. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you soon. And that ends our discussion for today. Thanks for listening to the Transforming Leadership Podcast with author and speaker, Dr. Steve Steff. For more information on how Dr. Steff and the Transforming Leadership team can help you become a more effective leader, please look online at tleadership.com. That's tleadership.com. Until next time, remember, building effectiveness in leaders starts with the transformation of your heart towards your people.